"You don't belong here, boy." The words cracked across the courthouse steps like a whip. Sergeant Doyle's hand hovered near his holster as he paced around the man in the faded gray suit. His voice carried the kind of certainty that came from practice, from years of knowing no one ever questioned him. "What's a thug like you doing here? Scouting a target?" The man didn't flinch. His tie was worn, his shoes shined, but old. His voice, when it came, was steady, almost unnaturally calm. "I work here." The calm unsettled Doyle more than defiance ever could. He sneered and barked a laugh. "Right, and I'm the governor. Brant, get the cuffs. Another one playing dress-up." Officer Brant grinned as the metal restraints clicked open. The sound was metallic, final, a noise meant to announce ownership. The rookie, Ruiz, lingered near the edge, uncertain. Too green to know what courage looked like in uniform. 5 seconds into the confrontation, and the crowd that had begun to gather already knew the script. They'd seen it before. Perhaps not here, perhaps not this boldly, but the rhythm was the same. A man stopped. A demand made, a refusal to accept his place in the order, and now the ceremony of humiliation would follow. The man's name was Nathaniel Cross. He stood beneath the heavy stone arch of the Eldridge County Courthouse, a building where justice was etched into the facade but rarely honored at the door. He had walked these steps for years, past portraits of judges whose smiles were carved in marble. Yet today, with one new guard on duty and 3 officers too eager to display authority, his presence had become a crime. "ID," demanded Klein, the young guard at the checkpoint. He had held Nathaniel's license as though it might change if given time. "What's your business here?" "I'm expected in courtroom 3. As a defendant?" The pause that followed was its own verdict. Behind Nathaniel, lawyers in tailored suits breezed through unchallenged. Their complexions matched the marble. No one asked their business. No one demanded a reason. Nathaniel's words were simple. "I work here." But to Klein, to Doyle, to Brant, those words were a provocation, not an answer. The decision was made. They would not humiliate him quietly. They would not dismiss him behind glass walls where only clerks might see. No, this needed a public stage. And so they pushed him out the doors into the parking lot where the sky was clear and the crowd had space to form. Doyle tightened his grip on Nathaniel's arm. Brant took the other. Ruiz followed, silent, his jaw tight. "Wait!" cried Evelyn Price, the courthouse clerk with 20 years of service. Her hair was silver, her steps hurried. She recognized the face, not from a headline or a story, but from mornings of routine greetings and steady presence. Doyle didn't look back. "We know exactly what we're doing, keeping the building safe. Safe from what? A man in a worn suit? A man who carried himself with the patience of someone who had already lived through this scene too many times." Phones rose in the crowd like a sudden field of mirrors. Lenses reflected the officers' smirks, the shove against fabric, the press of authority against a man who hadn't resisted. Some whispered, "Keep recording." Others whispered, "Not our fight." Then came the sound every witness knew too well, the metallic bite of cuffs closing around bone. Nathaniel did not resist. He studied the red glow of the security camera mounted on the courthouse wall. A small smile traced his lips, faint, private, almost hidden. It was not surrender. It was a secret. "Spread your legs," Doyle commanded. "Should have stayed in your neighborhood," Brant muttered. Nathaniel lowered his gaze to the pavement. Tiny pebbles sparkled in the asphalt, glinting like distant stars. He nodded slightly, as though agreeing with someone no one else could see. Children on a school trip stared from the steps, wide-eyed. One asked too loudly, "Is that what justice looks like at the courthouse?" His teacher hushed him, eyes cast downward. No one answered. The building above them said nothing. Ruiz shifted uncomfortably. "Sarge, maybe—" "Shut it!" Doyle barked. "You hear him threatening me, Brant?" "Loud and clear," Brant replied. The grin stretched thin. Nathaniel raised his voice, not to Doyle, not to Brant, but to the air, to the crowd, to the record. "I have the right to remain silent." "And I choose to use it," Brant snorted. "Knows the lines. Must be a regular." The moment lingered, heavy, unbroken. "Perhaps you've seen it before." Perhaps you've passed by when it happened on a quieter street, when no camera caught it, when no one stood close enough to intervene. This time, the camera was steady, the crowd watching, the silence unshaken. The question wasn't whether humiliation would follow. The question was why this man seemed so unafraid of it. Because some storms aren't weather, they're tests. And Nathaniel Cross had decided this storm would not end the way Doyle believed it would if... You think this is just another arrest? Wait, there is more beneath the surface than a badge, a laugh, or a pair of cuffs. This story carries a weight no insult can erase, and it begins here, in the parking lot where a man's calm was the most dangerous thing of all. The wind shifted, scattering papers from a nearby bench across the parking lot. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. But here, in the shadow of the courthouse, the scene had frozen into a grim ritual. Sergeant Doyle shoved Nathaniel against the cruiser, his shoulder colliding with cold metal. The impact sent a murmur through the crowd. "On your knees," Doyle ordered, his voice low, sharp. Asphalt scraped through thin fabric as Nathaniel was forced down. His suit tore, the threads splitting at the knee until blood seeped slowly into the cloth. The gesture was not about safety. It was about spectacle. The message was clear. Look how easily dignity can be undone. Evelyn Price pressed forward, her face pale, voice firm. "Officers, stop this now. You don't know who you're dealing with." Brant blocked her path, smirking. "Step back, ma'am, unless you'd like to join him." The crowd stirred uneasily. Some averted their eyes. Others raised their phones higher. A teenager's voice broke through. "He didn't do anything." Brant spun toward the sound, barking. "Who said that?" "You want cuffs too?" The teenager faltered but kept the phone steady, recording. Sometimes resistance was nothing more than refusing to lower your hand. Nathaniel lifted his head just enough to meet the camera's gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, no plea for sympathy. Only the stillness of a man who knew the ending long before the rest of the room had even noticed the beginning. "You think this is a game?" Doyle hissed, pressing his weight into Nathaniel's back. "You think being arrested is funny?" Nathaniel's voice came quiet, deliberate. "I think you have one chance to reconsider." The words hung in the air, heavier than any struggle. A warning disguised as courtesy. Brant laughed, but the sound rang hollow, glancing at the crowd to see if anyone shared it. "They didn't." "Delusional," he muttered. "Test him. He's on something." "Test me," Nathaniel replied without hesitation. "Go ahead." The simplicity of the response unsettled even Ruiz, who shifted uncomfortably, his face caught between duty and doubt. "Sarge, this doesn't feel right." Doyle ignored him. "Transport him. Get him off the property." The words fell flat. For the first time, the momentum of the officers seemed to waver. The crowd's presence shifted the balance, silent but undeniable. Eyes, phones, whispers, they were no longer background. They were witnesses. Evelyn tried again, pushing against Brant's arm. "You don't understand. You're making a mistake you can't take back," Doyle snapped. "There are always mistakes, usually theirs." That word, theirs, landed like a stone dropped into still water. It spread outwards, undeniable. Nathaniel raised his eyes toward the courthouse facade. The words carved above the door, "Equal justice under law," had never looked so false. He had walked under them for years, but now, with his knees bleeding on the pavement, they mocked him. "You threatening me?" Doyle growled, leaning close. "No," Nathaniel said evenly. "I'm offering you a chance." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. Even the breeze seemed to wait. Ruiz's voice broke it softly. "A chance for what?" "To avoid destroying your career," Nathaniel answered. "Here, in front of everyone." The crowd reacted with a ripple of unease. Some leaned forward, others exchanged glances. Brant tried to laugh again, but it faltered. He could feel the ground shifting, even if Doyle could not. From the steps of the courthouse, children pressed against the glass, their teachers trying to usher them away. But their eyes stayed fixed on the scene. A lesson was unfolding that no curriculum had prepared for. Nathaniel straightened as much as the cuffs allowed, turning toward the nearest camera. His voice was clear. "I have the right to remain silent, and I will use it." It wasn't defiance, it was patience. It was the sound of a man waiting for the moment when silence would become louder than shouting. Ruiz hesitated, then stepped forward. "Sir, just tell us who you are." Nathaniel looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, but with a calm that seemed out of place in the chaos. "Soon," he said. Evelyn closed her eyes, as though bracing for the inevitable. The crowd murmured, caught between outrage and anticipation. Doyle gripped the cruiser door handle, ready to force Nathaniel inside, desperate to end the spectacle. But the ordinary rhythm of power had already cracked. Something else was coming, and even Doyle, for all his bluster, seemed to sense it, because storms do not last forever. And sometimes the eye of the storm belongs to the man on his knees. 30 minutes earlier, the courthouse lobby looked like any other Tuesday. The marble floors gleamed, the brass railings shone, and a stream of attorneys swept through the security line with little more than a nod. Their shoes clicked confidently, their voices rose in casual greetings, the machinery of justice humming without pause. Nathaniel Cross had entered this building more times than he could count. 15 years of mornings that looked just like this one. 15 years of nods to clerks, handshakes with colleagues, silent glances at portraits of judges who had passed before him. He belonged here more than most, but belonging was never about years served. It was about perception. The new guard at the metal detector didn't recognize him. Youthful, pale, eager to display authority, Klein studied Nathaniel as if the worn suit itself were suspicious. His eyes narrowed. His hand lingered near the radio clipped to his belt. ID, Nathaniel handed it over without pause. A driver's license. Legitimate, clean. Yet Klein squinted as though waiting for the letters to rearrange themselves into the word fraud. "What's your business here?" The tone mattered more than the words. It was less inquiry, more accusation. Nathaniel's response came even, patient. "I'm expected in courtroom 3. Klein's mouth twisted. "As a defendant?" The silence that followed was a wound. Behind Nathaniel, 2 lawyers strode past unchecked. They carried no ID, answered no questions, yet no suspicion clung to them. Their suits were more expensive, their skin a little closer to the marble walls. Nathaniel stood still. He had learned long ago that sudden movements could spark suspicion, that calm could be the sharpest defense. "No," he said quietly but firmly. "I work here." Those words should have ended it. They did not. Klein's hand tapped his radio. "Got someone here. Claims he works in the courthouse." "Can't verify." The words spread quickly, not just through the radio, but through the crowd. A man in a worn suit. A claim of belonging. Doubt already seated. Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the line of visitors. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with open curiosity. Security was rarely interesting until it became a performance. Another guard approached, older, heavier, voice roughened by years of routine. "Problem, Klein?" "This guy says he works here." "Won't give specifics?" Nathaniel spoke slowly, making sure every word was measured. "I said I'm expected in courtroom 3. The older guard narrowed his eyes. His hand hovered over the canister of spray at his hip. "Show me your hands where I can see them." The command sliced the air. Conversations halted. People lingered at the edges of the lobby, sensing spectacle. The courthouse, built for judgment, had just turned its gaze on one of its own. From the elevator emerged Evelyn Price, her stack of files balanced precariously. 25 years of service made her a fixture in this building. She knew every janitor, every clerk, every attorney who walked these halls. When she saw Nathaniel ringed by suspicion, her steps faltered. "What's happening here?" Her voice carried the authority of experience, not rank. "Step back, ma'am," the older guard barked. "We've got a situation." Evelyn's eyes widened. "A situation? Do you know who—" "Step back!" The bark was louder this time, designed not to clarify but to silence. The radio crackled. Units responding. Through the glass doors, 3 cruisers swung into the lot, lights slicing the morning calm. The ritual was moving forward. Once the call was made, the outcome rarely changed. Nathaniel remained still. No sudden gestures. No argument. He knew what came next. He had seen it before, too many times, even here. Inside the building where he had dedicated his life to the very law now turned. Against him. "You people always think you can—" Just walk in anywhere, the guard muttered under his breath. The words weren't meant for Nathaniel alone. They were meant for everyone listening, for the crowd, for the record that would not officially exist. Evelyn tried again. Young man, you're making a mistake. But the backup had arrived, doors slamming, boots striking pavement. Sergeant Doyle led the trio, already unclipping his cuffs, a predator who smelled easy prey. Behind him, Brant and the rookie Ruiz followed, their eyes darting, their pace quick. "What have we got?" Doyle asked, though he hardly needed the answer. His gaze swept Nathaniel once, skin, suit, shoes, and the verdict was reached in less than 2 seconds. Suspicious individual. "Won't leave. Claims he belongs here," Klein reported. Doyle smirked. "All right, tough guy. Let's take this outside." Nathaniel tried one last time, his voice steady. "Officers, I have identification. You can explain it outside." Doyle cut him off, gripping his arm. Brant seized the other. The march began, the crowd parting, murmuring, watching. Evelyn's voice cracked as she tried to follow. "Wait, you don't understand, he's—" But the doors swung shut behind them, sealing her words inside the lobby. What had begun as a simple morning routine had transformed into accusation, then into spectacle. And for Nathaniel Cross, it was not the first time. The question was no longer whether he belonged here. The question was why his calm seemed to suggest he knew something the others did not. Because sometimes belonging is not proven by documents or declarations. Sometimes it is revealed only when the world tries to erase you from where you already stand. The doors of the courthouse swung wide, and the morning light poured over polished steps. Outside, the square buzzed with ordinary rhythm. Vendors unloading coffee carts, city workers sweeping sidewalks, citizens drifting toward hearings. Within seconds, that rhythm bent toward spectacle. Doyle and Brant led Nathaniel across the stone landing, their grips firm, their steps deliberate. The rookie Ruiz followed a pace behind, his hand brushing the holster at his hip as if reminding himself he carried authority. The sound of their boots echoed across the plaza, the sound of control announcing itself. "Move along!" Doyle barked at no one in particular, though his eyes lingered on the gathering bystanders. Control was only effective if it was observed. Evelyn Price hurried behind them, voice rising. "Officers, you need to listen. This is a mistake." Her words collided with the noise of the plaza, the hiss of a bus's brakes, the laughter of students on a field trip, the impatient rhythm of traffic horns. No one paused to amplify her warning. The spectacle drowned her out. Nathaniel's eyes scanned the crowd. Dozens of faces, some curious, some indifferent, a few concerned. Phones began to appear, lifted cautiously, screens angled to capture what was happening without drawing attention to the person holding them. The age of silent witnesses had become the age of digital evidence. "Hands on the car," Doyle ordered, shoving Nathaniel against the cruiser. The impact drew a gasp from a woman near the curb. "Spread your legs, wider." Nathaniel obeyed, but his stillness carried weight. He moved with the restraint of a man who had learned long ago that rapid motion could be mistaken for threat. "Check his pockets," Doyle instructed. Brant patted roughly at Nathaniel's jacket, his hands quick, careless, invasive. Nothing but a wallet, keys, a phone, items that marked him as no more threatening than any other man on that plaza. But to Doyle, to Brant, the items were irrelevant. The performance required only the pose, a black man bent against metal, his rights secondary to the assertion of power. A murmur spread through the onlookers. A teenager raised his phone higher. A teacher tugged her students closer, unsure whether to shield them from the sight or let them witness it as truth. "This is unnecessary," Nathaniel said quietly. "You threatening me?" Doyle pressed harder into his back. "Didn't hear that?" Brant asked, glancing at Ruiz. "Sounded like a threat to me." Ruiz hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed. The rookie's silence was safer than honesty. The first chant came from the edges of the crowd, hesitant but insistent. "Keep the cameras on." Others picked it up, the rhythm spreading like a heartbeat through the plaza. Doyle's jaw tightened. Brant scowled. Ruiz shifted, uneasy in the face of a crowd that had transformed from passive audience to witness. Nathaniel raised his head just enough to catch the nearest lens. His voice was low but steady. "I have the right to remain silent, and I will." It was not defiance. It was patience, a signal disguised as submission. The words turned the spectacle into testimony. Doyle gripped Nathaniel's collar and forced him lower, voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're above the law? Look at you now," Brant laughed, a sound hollow enough that even he seemed to hear its weakness. But Nathaniel's silence was louder than any denial could have been. He looked not at Doyle, not at Brant, but at the courthouse itself, the carved motto glaring down from stone, "Equal justice under law." Words that mocked him now, words that had mocked him before, words that the crowd could no longer ignore. Ruiz stepped forward, uncertain. "Sarge, maybe we should—" "Back off, rookie," Doyle snapped. "This is how it works." Nathaniel turned just slightly toward Ruiz. His expression was calm, measured. "You'll see soon enough." The phrase slipped through the crowd like a code, leaving questions in its wake. Soon enough. What did he mean? Why was he not afraid? Evelyn tried again, desperation in her voice. "Stop this! You're humiliating the wrong man." Brant spun on her, face flushed. "One more word and you'll join him." The tension stretched tight across the plaza. Bystanders watched, phones recording, breaths held. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to strike the hour. The cuffs dug into Nathaniel's wrists. Blood stained his knee where the fabric had torn. Yet he carried himself with the air of someone waiting for a stage cue only he could hear. The spectacle was reaching its peak, but the performance was not his. It belonged to Doyle, to Brant, to a system accustomed to unquestioned authority. Nathaniel was merely holding the silence that would one day echo louder than their laughter, and when that silence broke, it would change the meaning of everything unfolding in that plaza. The plaza was no longer just a space between courthouse and street. It had become a stage. Every angle held a phone. Every reflection in a windshield caught pieces of the scene. Sergeant Doyle thrived on that attention. His chest puffed, his voice carried, each order a performance. "On your knees," he barked again, not because it was needed, but because humiliation required repetition. Nathaniel sank lower, his movements deliberate, his breathing steady. The fabric of his suit tore further, exposing skin scraped raw. Blood darkened at the edge of the rip. The sight of it stirred unease in the crowd. They knew bruises faded, but the humiliation of forcing a man down lingered long after wounds healed. "Look at him," Brant said, circling like a predator savoring prey. "Another one who thinks he's special." His grin widened as laughter slipped from his mouth. Laughter meant to taunt the man in cuffs, but also to reassure himself that control remained intact. A woman in the crowd, young, her voice sharp with conviction, stepped forward. "This is wrong." He wasn't resisting. He wasn't doing anything. "Step back," Doyle warned. His hand pressed harder against Nathaniel's shoulder. "Or you'll regret it." The woman didn't move, though her hands trembled as she kept her phone high. Her defiance was quiet, but in that moment, it carried more weight than Doyle's orders. Nathaniel raised his head, his expression still unreadable, still calm in a storm designed to break him. He met Doyle's gaze without flinching. That composure made Doyle falter just for a breath, then press down harder as if the pressure could erase the unease creeping into him. "You planning something?" Doyle hissed, grabbing Nathaniel's chin, forcing his eyes upward. Nathaniel's silence was answer enough. He did not beg. He did not argue. He simply stared, his calm reflecting Doyle's fury back at him like a mirror. The rookie Ruiz swallowed hard, shifting uneasily. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Sarge, maybe we should slow this down." "Shut your mouth," Doyle snapped. But his words trembled with a hint of something else, uncertainty. Brant dangled the handcuffs in front of Nathaniel's face, letting the metal glint in the morning sun. "You know what these are?" "This is where the act ends. Now you look like you belong." Laughter rippled from Doyle and Brant, but it was brittle, carrying the echo of men clinging to authority. The crowd did not laugh with them. Some looked away, ashamed. Others recorded with grim determination. A teenager shouted, "Why are you doing this? He didn't do anything!" His voice cracked but didn't falter. "Who said that?" Doyle spun, his hand flexing near his weapon. "Who wants to join him?" The crowd went still, silence falling over the plaza like a heavy curtain. But the cameras remained. Every lens captured the sweat at Doyle's temple, the sneer on Brant's lips, the stillness of Nathaniel Cross. Then Nathaniel spoke, his voice low but carrying enough to reach the edges of the crowd. "I have the right to remain silent, and I will." It was a declaration, not a plea. The phrase, familiar from countless arrests, sounded different here. Spoken calmly, deliberately, it became a weapon rather than a shield. Brant scoffed. "Must have been arrested before." Knows the script, but something shifted in the crowd. People leaned in, drawn to the strangeness of a man who chose silence when humiliation demanded protest. His calm unnerved them, stirred questions. Who was he? Why wasn't he afraid? Ruiz glanced at Doyle, then at Brant, then at Nathaniel. His training told him to follow orders. His conscience whispered something else. The weight of those competing forces pressed down like the cuffs on Nathaniel's wrists. Evelyn pushed closer, her voice desperate. "Stop this! You're making a mistake you'll never undo." Brant moved to block her again, his anger sharp. "One more word and you're next." But the crowd had heard enough. Whispers swelled, small voices carrying truths Doyle couldn't silence. "Trespassing while black," someone muttered. "They don't even know who he is," another whispered. Doyle's face flushed. He tightened his grip on Nathaniel, forcing him lower, as though pressing him into the asphalt could bury the doubt spreading through the crowd. Nathaniel lifted his eyes once more to the nearest camera. There was no fear there, only something Doyle didn't recognize. Certainty. And with that certainty, a single truth lingered unspoken. This scene was not the end of Nathaniel Cross. It was the beginning of something none of them could yet imagine. The plaza swelled with tension, as though the morning itself were holding its breath. Every face turned toward the scene, every lens trained on the man kneeling against the cruiser, his wrists bound, his suit torn. The silence in Nathaniel's posture screamed louder than Doyle's barked commands. "Get him up!" Doyle ordered, yanking Nathaniel to his feet only to shove him back down again. "On your knees. Now." The asphalt bit deeper this time, grinding into the cut already bleeding. The cruelty was deliberate. Humiliation needed repetition to work its way into the soul. But Nathaniel's silence turned the ritual hollow. "Look at him," Brant jeered, scanning the crowd. "He thinks he's too good for this? Just another criminal who forgot his place." The words carried, but they didn't land the way he wanted. In the crowd, a few heads shook. The narrative was slipping. The laughter felt forced, like men trying to convince themselves of a lie they had told too many times. Ruiz hovered close, his hands twitching, his lips pressed tight. The rookie's unease was visible now, and the cameras caught it too. Doubt was seeping into the cracks of the performance. Nathaniel raised his chin, slow, deliberate. His gaze sought the nearest phone recording. His expression was steady, calm, as if the cuffs were nothing more than props in a play whose ending he already knew. "You think this is funny?" Doyle snarled, shoving him again. "You think being arrested is some kind of joke?" Nathaniel's voice was measured, deliberate, his words chosen like chess moves. "I think you have one chance to reconsider." The crowd shifted, the phrase hanging heavy in the air. One chance. The words were not shouted. They were not angry. They were simply true. And that truth made Doyle's face tighten with rage. "Are you threatening me?" he snapped, though even he seemed unsure whether he believed the accusation. "No." Nathaniel's eyes locked on Doyle's. "I'm offering you an opportunity to stop before this goes further." Brant barked a laugh, loud and hollow. "Hear that?" He's delusional. Thinks he's important. But his laughter didn't echo. The crowd did not join him. From the courthouse steps, Evelyn Price called again, her voice carrying above the murmurs. "Listen to him! You're humiliating yourselves. You don't know who you're dealing with." Doyle's grip on Nathaniel tightened, frustration seeping into every movement. He wanted fear, pleading, submission. Instead, he found calm, dignity, and an unsettling patience that made him feel like the one being judged. The chant grew louder now, spreading across the plaza. "Keep the cameras on! Keep the cameras on!" The rhythm was simple, steady, insistent. Phones stayed raised. Screens glowed. Every second, every gesture, every insult was being preserved. Nathaniel spoke again, his voice clear, strong enough to cut through the chant without breaking it. "I have the right to remain silent, and I choose to use it." It was more than a legal phrase. It was a declaration. Silence not as surrender, but as control. Silence as the refusal to give his captors what they wanted. Ruiz finally spoke, his voice strained. "Sarge, we should check." "Enough!" Doyle snapped, eyes blazing. He pressed Nathaniel harder against the cruiser, desperate to reassert control. But every shove, every barked command only fed the cameras, only made the silence louder. Nathaniel's eyes lifted again, past Doyle, past Brandt, to the words carved into the courthouse stone, "Equal justice under law." His gaze lingered there, not as a plea but as a reminder, and though he spoke to no one in particular, his words were clear. "Justice is watching," the crowd murmured, voices rising with conviction now. No longer whispers, no longer hesitant. The atmosphere shifted. The performance of control was cracking, replaced by something Doyle had not expected. Doubt, recognition, the stirrings of truth. Brandt stepped back, his grin faltering. Ruiz lowered his eyes, shame settling into his posture. Even Doyle hesitated for a moment, as though the weight of those words, "Justice is watching," had reached him despite himself. But habits are hard to break. Doyle shoved Nathaniel again, his voice raw. "Get him in the car! Now!" The crowd gasped, the chant surged, and the scene teetered on the edge of something larger. Nathaniel's calm remained, unbroken. And in that calm lay a promise that this moment was not an end, but the beginning of a reckoning none of them could yet imagine. The cruiser door swung open with a metallic groan. Doyle pressed Nathaniel forward, eager to finish the performance. But the crowd wasn't thinning, it was growing. Office workers on coffee breaks, families waiting for hearings, even a group of school children shepherded by nervous teachers. They gathered not out of curiosity alone, but because something in the scene demanded they bear witness. Brandt forced a smirk, though sweat lined his brow. "In you go," he muttered, shoving Nathaniel toward the back seat. Nathaniel resisted, not violently, but with a subtle shift, keeping his chin high, refusing to bow into the car like a guilty man. The restraint was unnerving. It carried more defiance than a struggle ever could. "You think you got a choice?" Doyle snarled, grabbing his collar. Nathaniel's voice was steady, almost quiet. "I think you'll regret this." The words froze Ruiz mid-step. They weren't shouted. They weren't desperate. They were simply delivered like a judge reading a verdict. Doyle's eyes narrowed. He shoved harder. "You threatening me?" "I'm giving you a chance," Nathaniel replied. "The last one you'll get." The air thickened. Even the wind seemed to pause. Brandt barked out a laugh, but it came jagged, uneasy. The crowd had stopped whispering. Their silence now carried weight. Then, from the courthouse doors, Evelyn Price appeared again, running, her voice hoarse from shouting. "Stop! You're making a mistake! That man is—" "Quiet!" Doyle snapped, waving her back. "One more step, and you're under arrest, too." But Evelyn kept moving, desperation carrying her forward. "That man is not who you think—" The sound of boots cut her off. Another figure emerged from the doors, her presence enough to halt the murmurs in the crowd. Judge Patricia Albright, robes flaring, face pale. Her voice cracked across the plaza. "What is going on here?" Doyle didn't turn. "Stay back, Judge. We've got this under control." Albright's eyes fell on Nathaniel, cuffed, bloodied, pressed against the cruiser. Her face blanched. "Dear God, do you know who you're arresting?" "A trespasser," Brandt said quickly. "Trying to breach security." The judge's voice trembled with anger. "That is Chief Judge Nathaniel Cross. He runs this courthouse." The words struck like a hammer. The rookie Ruiz froze, his hand dropping from his weapon. Brandt's face drained of color. Doyle shook his head violently, as though denial could rewrite reality. No, he's lying to you. This is a trick, but the radio crackled at Doyle's belt. Unit 12, confirm. Did you say Nathaniel Cross? Chief Judge Cross, please respond immediately. Confirm you are not detaining the presiding judge of Eldridge County. Silence followed, a silence deeper than any command could enforce. Cameras zoomed closer. The crowd leaned in. Sweat gathered at Doyle's temple. His grip faltered. Brant staggered back, muttering. Ruiz whispered, "God help us." Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos like the crack of a gavel. "I told you. One chance." Doyle's face hardened, but his hand trembled. "No, this is some setup." "It has to be." Evelyn stepped forward, pointing at the cuffs. "For 20 years I've seen that man walk these halls." "And you put him on his knees in the parking lot." The weight of her words settled over the crowd. The teachers guiding their students, the clerks clutching their files, the citizens waiting for trials. All of them had seen enough to understand what was unfolding. Nathaniel's silence returned, but it was no longer submission. It was judgment. Every glance, every measured breath testified louder than Doyle's denials, and in that moment, the performance ended. The spectacle collapsed under its own weight. The crowd no longer saw a man in cuffs. They saw the truth behind the uniforms, the power behind the calm. The humiliation turned into evidence. The reckoning had begun, and there was no undoing it now. At the end of this part, the question was no longer whether Nathaniel belonged. The question was how far the system would go to deny what everyone now knew, that they had humiliated the very man who held authority over them all. If you've stayed with this story, let it linger. Because what follows next will show not just the fall of 3 officers, but the exposure of an entire system. And the cameras will not look away. Time seemed to fracture. The crowd was no longer just watching, they were recording history. Every phone caught the same images. The cuffs biting into Nathaniel's wrists, the blood on his knees, Doyle's hand trembling as reality crashed down. The radio at Doyle's belt sputtered again. The dispatcher's voice sharp, demanding, "Confirm status of Chief Judge Nathaniel Cross immediately." "Repeat, do not detain Judge Cross." The words echoed like a verdict. Ruiz stepped back, horrified. "Chief Judge?" His voice cracked. His training hadn't prepared him for this moment, for the realization that the man they'd brutalized wasn't a suspect at all, but the highest authority in the very building they claimed to protect. Brant's laughter died in his throat. He looked from Nathaniel to the crowd, then back to Doyle, panic bleeding through his grin. "Sarge, what do we do?" Doyle shook his head, sweat sliding down his temple. "It's fake. It's all fake. Look at him. Look at his clothes. A judge doesn't look like that." But the denial rang hollow. Evelyn Price's voice cut through. "For 15 years he's walked these halls. Every morning, every evening. And you never noticed, because you never looked." The weight of her words sank into the plaza. People who had passed Nathaniel daily nodded, recognizing him now, shamed by their silence before. Nathaniel lifted his head, his voice calm, certain. "Sergeant Doyle, badge number 2847, 3 years on the force. 17 complaints of excessive force, dismissed," the crowd gasped. Doyle's face drained of color. Nathaniel turned slightly, his gaze fixed on Brant. "Officer Brant, 6 years. A record of stops outside this courthouse. 15 black men detained in the last month alone. Not one charged." Brant staggered as if struck. His hand fell from the cuffs, his confidence unraveling. Finally, Nathaniel's eyes found Ruiz. The rookie froze under that steady gaze. "You tried to speak up," Nathaniel said, his tone softer now. "And then you fell silent. That silence is how systems survive. It breaks good men until they choose complicity." Ruiz's face crumpled. His lips moved, searching for words, but none came. Doyle's fury returned in a flash of desperation. He yanked at his weapon, the crowd gasping as metal gleamed in the sunlight. "Don't!" Judge Albright's voice cracked, sharp with fear. She stepped forward, robes fluttering. "You've already assaulted a sitting judge. You're digging your own grave!" The camera zoomed closer, capturing every twitch, every bead of sweat. Nathaniel did not flinch. His voice remained level, the calm of a man holding the weight of the law itself. "This is where your power ends, Sergeant. Here, in front of witnesses." For a heartbeat, Doyle stood frozen, the weapon halfway drawn. The world seemed to tilt, waiting for the choice he would make. Then another voice thundered across the plaza. Enough. The mayor herself, flanked by the police commissioner, strode into the square. Her face was pale with fury, her eyes fixed on the sight of her city's chief judge bleeding, cuffed, humiliated. "Commissioner," she said, her tone sharp as broken glass, "explain to me why Judge Cross is shackled like a criminal in his own courthouse." The commissioner's voice faltered. "Madam Mayor." No," she cut him off. "Not later. Not behind closed doors. Here, now, in front of everyone." Doyle stammered. "It's a setup. He doesn't belong here." Nathaniel stepped forward, wrists raw and bleeding. His voice carried across the plaza, across the cameras, across history. "That is the point, Sergeant. In this city, in this country, men who look like me are always told we don't belong. But I am chief judge of this courthouse. And today, the world will see who truly does not belong." The crowd erupted, some in gasps, others in shouts, still others with the quiet conviction of truth finally spoken aloud. The phones captured every second, every face. In that moment, the humiliation no longer rested on Nathaniel. It clung to Doyle, to Brandt, to every official who had allowed this ritual to persist. And though the cuffs still bound him, Nathaniel stood taller than any man in the plaza, because sometimes power is not in the weapon or the uniform. Sometimes it lies in the calm refusal to bow, even when the world demands it. And Nathaniel Cross had just revealed where true power lived. The revelation rippled outward like a shock wave. Phones trembled in raised hands, capturing the faces of men who only moments earlier had been laughing. The cameras no longer framed a suspect. They framed an exposure. Judge Patricia Albright's words echoed in every corner of the plaza. "Chief Judge Nathaniel Cross." The title hit Doyle like ice water. Brandt's swagger collapsed into silence. Ruiz looked at the ground, ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. Evelyn Price pressed closer, her voice trembling but resolute. "For 20 years I've worked here. Every morning he's greeted me at the desk. And today you put him on his knees." The crowd stirred. Recognition spread. Those who had passed Nathaniel daily without seeing him now saw clearly. The shame was collective, but the anger was too. Doyle shook his head, grasping at denial like a drowning man. "No, you're all lying. This is some trick. He's no judge." But Nathaniel's silence was heavier than protest. He stood in torn fabric, wrists bound, blood drying on his knees, and still he carried himself as though the cuffs were made of paper. When he finally spoke, the calm in his voice made the square lean closer. "My identification," he said evenly, "is in the pocket your officer searched so roughly." Brandt's hands trembled as he reached inside the jacket. He pulled free the wallet, fumbling through until a gold medallion slipped into his palm. The seal of the state Supreme Court caught the light, glinting like fire. The sound that followed wasn't applause, nor was it outrage. It was something quieter but more dangerous. A collective inhale, the realization that the lie had collapsed. Ruiz whispered, "It's real." Doyle lunged forward, snatching the card, squinting as though disbelief could erase what he held. "Fake. Has to be fake. These people are good at forgeries." "These people?" Nathaniel repeated softly, his voice carrying weight. "Say it plainly, Sergeant." "Which people?" Doyle's mouth opened, but the words jammed in his throat. The crowd leaned in, dozens of cameras catching the silence where an insult should have been. From the edge of the plaza, a black town car pulled up, sleek and imposing. Doors opened, and Mayor Caroline Ward emerged, flanked by Police Commissioner Hayes. The sight of them silenced even Doyle. The mayor's eyes locked on the cuffs, on the torn suit, on the blood. Her voice, when it came, was sharp enough to cut stone. "Commissioner, explain why my chief judge is bleeding in the courthouse parking lot." Hayes faltered. His jaw opened, closed. No words came. Doyle tried to speak, desperation cracking his voice. "He looked like..." "Like what?" Nathaniel interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. Finish your sentence, Sergeant. What did I look like to you? The crowd froze. Cameras tightened their focus. Doyle's mouth moved soundlessly. He had no answer, only the raw panic of a man exposed. Mayor Ward turned to the commissioner, her tone colder than steel. Remove the cuffs, now! Hayes reached with shaking hands, fumbling with the key. The metal fell away, leaving angry red marks on Nathaniel's wrists. He rubbed them slowly, deliberately, as the cameras captured every detail. Nathaniel straightened, torn suit and all, his presence filling the plaza. His voice resonated like a verdict. Assault, false imprisonment, violation of civil rights. Shall I continue? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. The crowd shifted from passive witnesses to something more, something closer to jurors. Doyle stood exposed, Brandt pale, Ruiz trembling. Nathaniel turned to the mayor, his words deliberate. We were scheduled to meet today about bias in policing. Consider this Exhibit A. The mayor's expression hardened. Commissioner Hayes looked ill, as though he'd swallowed glass. Evelyn Price wiped tears from her face, nodding fiercely at the truth spoken aloud. And the crowd, citizens, clerks, students, strangers, found their voices again. They weren't whispers anymore. They were demands. Justice, someone shouted. Accountability, another answered. The chant built, layered, swelling. Phones recorded, but voices carried more than any device. For Doyle, Brandt, and every officer who had laughed moments ago, the plaza no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a courtroom, and Nathaniel Cross had just taken the bench. The plaza now pulsed like a living courtroom. The marble steps became a witness stand, the crowd transformed into a jury, and every phone screen served as a court recorder. Nathaniel, bloodied but unbroken, stood in the center, no robe on his shoulders, yet carrying authority none could deny. Sergeant Doyle clung to denial. This is a setup! He's tricking all of you! His voice rose, frantic, cracking under the weight of cameras that saw through every word. A judge doesn't dress like that. He doesn't look like... Finish it, Nathaniel said, his voice deep, commanding. Say the words. Say what you see when you look at me. Doyle froze. The crowd leaned closer. The silence forced him to confront what he'd hidden behind the badge, prejudice so old it felt like instinct. But the words would not come. Brandt shifted uneasily, his earlier arrogance gone. He looked like a man watching his own career dissolve. Ruiz, the rookie, finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Judge Cross, I'm sorry. I should have stopped this. Nathaniel turned his gaze on him, calm but unyielding. You tried. Then you stayed silent. That silence is the system's shield. That silence has destroyed more lives than bullets. Ruiz swallowed hard, shame etched across his face. The cameras drank in his trembling confession. Mayor Ward stepped forward, her heels striking the pavement like a gavel. Commissioner Hayes, she said coldly, you will answer for this. Hayes's lips moved, but Nathaniel's voice cut across his hesitation. The answer is here already. The evidence is visible to every person in this square. The system didn't need a hood or a nightstick this morning. It needed only assumption. And it needed silence. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in fierce, unified murmurs. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering explanations about history repeating itself. Clerks wept quietly, recognizing the man they had passed for years. A teenager shouted, We've all seen it now! No excuses. Doyle tried to rally his authority. You don't belong here, he spat, voice trembling. Not dressed like that. Not looking like that. The words finally landed heavy, raw. Nathaniel stepped closer, his posture towering despite the torn fabric and the bloodied knees. Exactly. In your eyes, I will never belong. And yet, I have presided over your city's courts for 15 years, signed your warrants, ruled on your cases, wielded the gavel you swore to serve. He paused, turning so the crowd could see his face. So let's be clear. Today wasn't about suspicion. It wasn't about security. It was about appearance. It was about prejudice wrapped in uniform. Evelyn Price's voice cracked with emotion. And it happened in broad daylight, to a man you should have recognized. Nathaniel lifted his cuffed wrists, now raw and marked. And if this happens to me, a chief judge, what happens to the ones without titles? To the men and women who cannot prove their worth with a badge or a medallion? What happens to them? The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The crowd grew restless, not with fear, but with the clarity of truth. Mayor Ward's expression hardened further. Commissioner Hayes, effective immediately. These officers are suspended pending investigation. Doyle sputtered, rage and fear mixing in his throat. You can't do this! The union— Nathaniel cut him off, his voice steady and cold. The union will hear from me as well. They will receive a file. 17 complaints dismissed, dash cam footage mysteriously erased, and witness statements buried. The cost will not be measured in careers, Sergeant. It will be measured in millions. Brandt's legs buckled. Ruiz's shoulders slumped in silent defeat. Doyle clenched his fists, but the fury had lost its anchor, and then, as if to seal the moment, a chant rose from the crowd. It wasn't soft this time. It was thunderous, layered, echoing against courthouse stone. Justice! 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 The square became a trial. The officers stood accused. The evidence was the blood, the cuffs, the humiliation, and the truth spoken aloud. Nathaniel Cross, still in his torn suit, did not raise his voice to silence them. He let the chant build, let it roll through the plaza until it became undeniable. Because on that morning, in that square, justice had already begun its work. An hour later, the square outside still throbbed with restless energy, but inside the courthouse, a different storm gathered. The conference room had never felt this heavy. Sunlight cut through tall windows, falling across polished wood and long faces. At the head of the table sat Nathaniel Cross, now in a clean suit. Yet no one could miss the crimson marks still ridging his wrists, or the stiffness in his posture from bloodied knees. His wounds spoke louder than introductions. Mayor Ward sat rigid. Commissioner Hayes beside her, his tie loosened as though air itself had become scarce. District Attorney Chen kept her hands folded tightly, knuckles pale. Across the table, Frank Morrison, the police union president, radiated fury, his thick hands clenched as if he could strangle the truth back into silence. 3 civilian oversight members sat at the far end, pens poised but unused, their eyes fixed on Cross. The silence lasted a full minute, broken only by the faint hum of cameras still broadcasting outside. Cross let it stretch, let it settle, until every person present felt the weight of their own breathing. Finally, Morrison snapped. Judge Cross, while we regret the incident— Incident? Cross's voice cut the room like a blade. Cold, deliberate. Is that what we're calling assault, false imprisonment, and humiliation in broad daylight? An incident? Morrison's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Cross rose, clicking a remote. The wall screen flickered to life. The first image, footage from just an hour before, Doyle's hand gripping his collar, Brandt shoving him to his knees, Ruiz hesitating in shame. The sound of laughter spilled into the room, tinny yet searing. Look at him, Brandt had said. Another one who thinks he's special. The laughter echoed now, filling the sterile conference space until it felt suffocating. Nobody spoke. Cross clicked again. New images appeared. Dash cam clips, grainy but damning. Stops outside the courthouse. Black men shoved against walls. Latino teens surrounded by cruisers. Asian families pulled from cars for random checks. No charges filed. No records kept. Until now. These, Cross said, his voice steady, are not mistakes. They are patterns. Patterns protected by this union. His gaze bored into Morrison. Protected, buried, excused. Morrison slammed a fist against the table. Those were investigated. By whom? Cross snapped back, his control precise but unrelenting. Your hand-picked board? Your silent committees? Do you dare call this justice? Morrison's face darkened. Hayes shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming along his hairline. Cross advanced slowly, his voice lowering, drawing every ear. For 17 months, complaints vanished. For 17 months, footage malfunctioned. For 17 months, citizens bled while the system protected its own. The screen changed again, this time to documents. Reports never filed. Complaints stamped resolved without signatures. Union emails pressing supervisors to drop charges. Every line, every omission, another nail in the coffin of denial. Mayor Ward leaned forward, her voice tight. "Judge Cross, what are you proposing?" Cross turned, his eyes steady, his voice sharp. "Not proposing, implementing." He let the words hang. Even Morrison flinched. "Effective immediately," Cross continued. "Civilian oversight will have binding authority. Every case of misconduct, every complaint, every review, decided by the people, not by the same men who cover for one another." He clicked again. A new slide, a bold chart, mandatory body cameras locked to prevent deactivation. Every patrol car monitored, every minute accounted for. No more shadows to hide in. Hayes opened his mouth. "Judge, the budget—" "Sell one armored vehicle," Cross interrupted. "Fund a year of oversight. What's the price of a black man's dignity? What's the cost of a citizen's life? Tell me, Commissioner. Put a number on it." The room fell silent again, the kind of silence that stripped excuses bare. "And training," Cross pressed on. "Not the half-day seminars you parade for headlines. 70 hours, 40 on implicit bias, 20 on de-escalation, 10 on the very law these officers claim to enforce." Morrison slammed his chair back. "This is madness." "You're destroying morale." Cross's voice turned icy. "Morale. Tell me, Frank, what morale was left when Officer Doyle pressed his knee into my back? When Brandt laughed as blood spread through my suit? When Ruiz stayed silent because fear of a sergeant outweighed duty to the law?" Ruiz's name stung the room. The rookie, sitting small in a corner seat, lowered his head. Cross leaned forward, his voice rising now, sharp as judgment itself. "Today you do not choose between me and them. You choose between truth and deception, between reform and ruin, between justice and collapse." He let the silence stretch once more, then ended with a final, razor-edged question. "Which side of history will you sit on?" The conference room was thick with tension, as though oxygen itself had fled. Every figure around the table looked cornered, forced to decide whether they would cling to the old walls of silence or step into the dangerous unknown of reform. Mayor Ward broke first. She leaned forward, hands clasped, her tone deliberate. "Judge Cross, I second your motion for oversight authority. It's long overdue." District Attorney Chen followed, her voice firm despite the storm brewing. "I support binding oversight. And I'll add this. Every case from the past 3 years involving Doyle and Brandt will be reopened." Morrison erupted. His fist slammed the table, rattling glasses of water. "Over my dead body. You're tearing this department apart. You can't throw good men to the wolves for one mistake." Cross didn't flinch. "One mistake?" His words thundered in the quiet. 17 complaints, dozens of lives scarred, hours of erased footage. That is not one mistake. It is a design. A system that rewards silence and punishes conscience. He turned his gaze on Ruiz, the rookie still hunched in shame. "Tell them, Officer Ruiz. Tell them how silence is taught." Ruiz's throat worked, his voice barely audible at first. "We're told—" "Don't question the sergeant. Don't contradict in public. Don't embarrass the badge. If you do, you're done." The civilians at the far end scribbled notes furiously. Morrison's face turned red, but his bluster was cracking. Cross's voice softened, but the weight of it filled every corner. "This system doesn't just break citizens. It breaks good officers until they forget their oath." Mayor Ward stood abruptly. "Enough. We've all heard enough. I move to adopt Judge Cross's reforms. All of them," Hayes paled. "Mayor, with respect, the cost," Cross interrupted, "is already in the millions. Do you want me to show you the lawsuit drafts? The federal complaint? Or would you rather save your city the humiliation of a consent decree forced by the Justice Department?" His words hit like artillery. Hayes sank back into his chair. Morrison tried one last time, his voice hoarse. "You're bluffing. No judge would drag his own city into federal control." Cross stepped closer, his gaze icy. "I already called the U.S. Attorney. They are watching. If this city refuses reform, Washington will force it," the union boss faltered. His bluster collapsed into silence. For the first time in years, Frank Morrison had no threat left to wield. The room stilled. Every leader knew the decision they made here would echo beyond the walls, beyond the city. This was no longer about one judge. It was about the survival of their legitimacy. Mayor Ward raised her hand. All in favor of adopting these reforms effective immediately? One by one, hands rose. Chen's first, then the oversight members. Finally, even Hayes, face gray with resignation, lifted his hand. Only Morrison kept his arms crossed, defiance flickering until it looked more like fear. Motion carried, the mayor declared, her voice steady but her eyes fierce. Cross exhaled, not relief but resolve. Then the work begins now. Commissioner Hayes, you have 72 hours to implement Phase 1. Civilian oversight will review your progress daily, and the citizens outside will be watching. He gathered his papers, rising to leave. The room still vibrated with the aftershock of what had just unfolded. But before he reached the door, he stopped, turning back. His eyes locked on Morrison. You said I was destroying good men. No, they destroyed themselves the moment they chose laughter over humanity. The only thing I'm destroying is the lie that has shielded them. The words landed like a gavel strike. Morrison's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. Cross left the room, the echo of his footsteps sharp against the marble floor. Outside, the chants from the plaza still rumbled. Carried on the wind, justice, justice, justice. And for the first time in years, the walls of power had bent, not to negotiation, not to politics, but to truth that refused to be silenced. The question that lingered now was simple and dangerous. Would those reforms hold, or would the system fight back harder than ever before? 3 weeks later, the courthouse steps looked unrecognizable. Where blood had once darkened the pavement, children now scrawled chalk drawings of scales, gavels, and words like fairness and truth. What had been a stage for humiliation was slowly becoming a space for healing. Nathaniel Cross stood at a podium, his voice steady, his body still carrying the stiffness of that morning's bruises. Around him, hundreds gathered, citizens, activists, clerks, even officers in plain clothes. Their presence carried a different energy now, not silent watching, not fearful hesitation, but participation. At the edge of the crowd, a boy no older than 8 tugged at his mother's sleeve, eyes wide with awe. He stepped forward, his voice carrying over the murmurs. Judge Cross? Nathaniel bent to meet his gaze. Yes, son? My mom says you're the reason Officer Doyle can't hurt people anymore. The boy's innocence cut through the noise of politics and policy. Nathaniel smiled, though his knees still ached when he crouched. What's your name? Jerome. Well, Jerome, Nathaniel said, pointing to the crowd behind him, I helped, yes. But the real reason Doyle can't hurt people anymore is all of them. The ones who recorded. The ones who refused to look away. The ones who stood as witnesses. Jerome's mother wiped tears from her eyes. The crowd murmured in agreement, the weight of collective truth pressing deeper. Across the plaza, a surprising figure worked at a community table. Ruiz, the rookie who had faltered that morning, was no longer in uniform. Instead, he wore a plain volunteer shirt serving food to neighbors. Word had spread. Ruiz had resigned from the force, enrolled in law school, and vowed to earn back what the badge had cost. When Nathaniel noticed him, their eyes met briefly. Ruiz raised a hand in quiet acknowledgement. Nathaniel nodded back, the smallest gesture of grace. Then Commissioner Hayes appeared, not in uniform, but in civilian clothes. The voters had spoken. His resignation was set to take effect in weeks. Still, he had asked to speak. The crowd grew restless, skeptical, some outright angry at his presence. But Hayes climbed the steps anyway. His voice cracked from the start. I've been a cop for 25 years, and for most of them I told myself I was one of the good ones. He swallowed hard. But I wasn't. I was just better at hiding, better at explaining away complaints, better at burying what I didn't want to see. The crowd shifted uneasily. An elderly black man shouted, We know, Commissioner! We've always known. Hayes nodded, tears sliding down his face. I let Doyle terrorize citizens. I let Brandt laugh at Payne. I let Kenny at the courthouse profile every black face he saw. Not because I agreed, but because silence was easier than fighting the system I had sworn to protect. Gasps rippled. Some cursed him under their breath. Others folded their arms, unconvinced. But Nathaniel lifted a hand, urging quiet. Commissioner Hayes, he said formally, apologies are words. Justice requires action. What will you do? Hayes's voice steadied. I'm testifying against Doyle, against Brandt, against the system I shielded. No blue wall, no silence. Every file, every cover-up, every truth I buried, I will put on record. The plaza erupted. Some cheered. Others stood stunned, unsure whether to trust a man who had enabled so much harm. But none could deny the magnitude of what had just been promised. Martha Price, the clerk who had fought to stop the arrest, appeared at Nathaniel's elbow, pride shining in her eyes. "Your Honor," she whispered, "it's time." Nathaniel returned to the podium. The crowd hushed. 3 weeks ago, I was humiliated for existing in a suit the wrong color on skin the wrong shade. Today you stand with me, not as spectators but as witnesses turned actors. And justice is no longer an idea. It's a demand. His gaze swept the crowd, catching the faces of children holding chalk, elders clutching canes, workers with weary eyes, and even Hayes, trembling with guilt. Justice, he continued, isn't a speech. It isn't a title. It's Jerome walking to school without fear. It's Ruiz choosing truth over silence. It's Hayes breaking a code he swore would never break. And it's every one of you deciding that silence is no longer acceptable. The cheer that followed shook the courthouse steps. Nathaniel raised his hand for quiet. His final words that day cut deeper than any demand for policy or reform. Justice is not mine to deliver alone. It belongs to you, to every camera lifted, every witness who speaks, every voice that refuses to be quiet. Justice will live or die by whether you choose to stand tomorrow. When no podium waits and no cameras record, the applause roared again, rolling across the square like thunder. And as Jerome darted forward to hug Nathaniel's leg, the judge bent, lifted the boy, and whispered something only Jerome could hear. The boy grinned wide, then shouted for all to hear, "I'm going to be a judge too, so there's no injustice left to fight." The crowd erupted in hope, voices shaking the plaza. For the first time in years, the courthouse was not just a symbol of broken promises. It was a beacon. And Nathaniel Cross stood taller than he ever had in robes, because this time he wasn't standing alone. 6 months later, Courtroom 3 bore the weight of history. The same room Nathaniel had struggled to enter on that morning of humiliation now stood filled with press, citizens, and a jury whose faces carried the gravity of what was at stake. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the clerk asked. The foreman stood, voice steady. "We have, Your Honor. We find the defendant Derek Doyle guilty on all counts." A collective exhale swept the chamber. Some clapped, some cried, others simply bowed their heads in quiet vindication. Doyle's shoulders sagged, his arrogance gone, his badge long stripped. The blue wall had not saved him this time. Wilson's trial loomed next week, and the city already braced for more. Nathaniel sat not on the bench, but in the gallery, robes absent, face solemn. He had chosen to watch as a citizen, letting justice operate without his direct hand. For the first time, the system worked not because of him, but alongside him. Outside the courthouse, Jerome waited in a tiny suit, his mother's hand resting protectively on his shoulder. When Nathaniel emerged, Jerome ran forward. "Did we win, Judge Cross?" Nathaniel knelt, knees aching but steady. "We started winning the day people refused to look away. Today is confirmation. News cameras captured the image, an elder judge crouching before a child who represented tomorrow. But this wasn't for headlines anymore. It was about inheritance, about planting the idea of justice where fear had once rooted deep. Martha Price appeared as she always did at the right moment, her voice trembling with joy. "Your Honor, the new training begins Monday. 300 officers signed up. And guess who's leading it?" From the courthouse steps came Ruiz, no longer officer, now law student, sleeves rolled up, case books under his arm. He smiled sheepishly, his face carrying both humility and determination. "Top of my class," he said, "and I still feel like I owe a debt." Nathaniel clasped his hand. From enforcer to educator, that's real reform. The sun hung low, bathing the courthouse in gold. Nathaniel walked slowly down the steps, remembering each stride. 6 months ago, humiliation had been written into every bruise, every scrape. Today, every step was a reclamation. Near the curb, a young officer approached, badge freshly polished, uniform crisp, voice uncertain. "Sir, I'm Officer Chen. I wanted you to know your case is why I joined. To be different. To be better." Nathaniel studied him, seeing sincerity and fear mingled in his eyes. "Then be better. Every call, every stop, every choice. That's how change holds, decision by decision." Chen saluted awkwardly, then departed into the crowd, carrying with him both hope and responsibility. Nathaniel turned toward his car. It was parked near the spot where Doyle had once forced him to his knees. Now a small bronze plaque marked the asphalt. On this spot, injustice was exposed. "May we never need such revelation again." Nathaniel paused, letting the words settle. He knew the truth. They would need revelation again. Somewhere another man was being profiled, another woman searched without cause, another life reduced to stereotype. The system did not surrender overnight, but change had taken root. People were watching, speaking, recording. The silence that had once protected cruelty was cracking. His phone buzzed. A message from Jerome lit the screen, studying hard. "See you in court someday." Nathaniel smiled, fingers typing a reply. "Looking forward to it, Your Honor." The words carried more than encouragement. They were a promise that tomorrow's fight would not be his alone, that a new generation, unscarred but not unknowing, would rise. He looked back one last time at the courthouse. Its marble gleamed under the setting sun, the carved motto catching the light: equal justice under law. For the first time, the words did not feel like mockery. They felt like a possibility, fragile, hard-won, but real, and with that, Nathaniel Cross drove away, leaving behind not just a courthouse, but a movement. Because justice, he had learned, does not rest in the gavel of one man. It rests in the voices of the many who refuse to be silent. And on that truth, the work would continue. The story of Nathaniel Cross reminds us that humiliation can be turned into testimony, and silence can be louder than any weapon. What began as one man in cuffs became a movement that forced a system to face itself. But the question lingers: how many others will face the same injustice tomorrow? How many names will never make it to headlines, never reach a courtroom, never find witnesses? That's why these stories matter, because every time you watch, every time you share, you become part of the record that cannot be erased. If you felt the weight of this story, if it shook you, angered you, or gave you hope, then let that emotion live beyond this video. Like it, subscribe, and join this community of witnesses who refuse to look away. On this channel, we bring forward stories buried under silence. Stories that force us to ask, what does justice really mean? And who among us will stand when the moment comes? We have more journeys ahead, more truths to uncover, more voices to amplify, more reckonings to demand. And if you stay with us, you'll see them, you'll feel them, and together we'll keep asking the questions that power most fears. This isn't the end. It's only the latest chapter. Until next time, stay awake, stay watching, and remember, justice isn't a destination. It's a choice we make again and again. We'll see you in the next story.